The sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty trading post as Sarah clutched her newborn daughter closer to her chest. The baby's soft whimpers mixed with the sounds of horses and men bartering outside the wooden structure that had become her prison. 3 months had passed since she gave birth, and Marcus still refused to let her leave. "You belong to me now," Marcus had told her countless times since bringing her to this remote outpost on the Texas frontier. "You and that baby are mine to do with as I please." Sarah remembered the day her life changed forever. She had been traveling with a wagon train from Missouri to California with her late husband when Apache raiders attacked. Thomas died protecting the wagons, and she was taken captive. For weeks she lived among the Apache, learning their ways, eating their food, and slowly accepting that rescue might never come. Then Marcus arrived at the Apache camp with his men, claiming to be a traitor. He negotiated for her release, paying the Apache chief with rifles and whiskey. Sarah thought she was being saved, but freedom never came. Marcus had other plans. "I paid good money for you," he would remind her whenever she spoke of leaving. 20 rifles and 10 bottles of whiskey. "You're worth more to me here than you'd ever be anywhere else." The trading post sat at the crossroads of several trails, making it a popular stop for travelers, soldiers, and Native American tribes. Marcus ran a profitable business selling supplies, weapons, and information to anyone willing to pay. Sarah cooked, cleaned, and helped tend to customers while caring for her daughter, Emma. During her pregnancy, Marcus had been somewhat gentler, knowing the baby would increase her value to him. But after Emma's birth, his true nature emerged. He drank heavily, flew into violent rages, and made it clear that Sarah was his property. The few travelers who questioned the arrangement were quickly intimidated into silence by Marcus and his 3 hired men. Sarah often stood by the window, watching wagon trains pass in the distance. Each one represented hope and freedom that felt impossibly far away. She had tried to escape twice in the early months, but Marcus's men always caught her. The punishment was swift and painful, serving as a reminder of her helpless situation. "Where would you go anyway?" Marcus would taunt her. "You're hundreds of miles from anywhere civilized. The desert would kill you before you made it 10 miles. The other women at the trading post were Mexican girls who had been bought or traded from various sources. They spoke little English and kept to themselves, understanding that survival meant staying invisible. Sarah tried to befriend them, but fear kept them distant. One evening, as Sarah prepared dinner over the fire outside the trading post, she noticed a lone rider approaching from the east. The man sat tall in his saddle, and even from a distance she could see he was different from the usual rough traders and cowboys who frequented the post. As he drew closer, Sarah realized he was Apache. His long black hair was adorned with feathers, and his clothing was a mix of traditional Apache garments and items acquired through trade. But what struck her most were his eyes, intelligent and observant, taking in every detail of the trading post and its inhabitants. Marcus emerged from the building, his hand resting on his gun belt. He was always suspicious of Apache visitors, despite conducting regular business with various tribes. The relationship was one of mutual benefit and mutual distrust. "What do you want?" Marcus called out in broken Apache, his voice carrying the usual edge of hostility. The Apache man dismounted gracefully and approached with calm confidence. When he spoke, his English was clear and precise, surprising both Marcus and Sarah. "I come to trade," the stranger said simply. "I have silver and furs." Marcus relaxed slightly at the mention of valuable goods. Silver was always welcome, and quality furs could be sold to wealthy customers traveling through to California. "Let's see what you've got," Marcus replied, gesturing toward his trading room. As the Apache man unloaded his packhorse, Sarah found herself stealing glances at him. There was something about his presence that felt different from the usual chaos and violence that surrounded the trading post. He moved with purpose and dignity, treating his horse with gentle respect. When their eyes met briefly across the yard, Sarah felt an unexpected jolt of recognition. Not that she had seen him before, but something in his gaze suggested understanding, as if he could see past the surface of her situation to the trapped woman beneath. The trading session lasted well into the evening. Sarah could hear Marcus's voice growing louder and more animated as the whiskey flowed. The Apache man, who had identified himself as Ayana, remained calm and measured in his responses. During a break in negotiations, Ayana stepped outside for fresh air. Sarah was hanging laundry on a line strung between 2 posts, baby Emma sleeping in a basket nearby. The Apache man approached slowly, his movements non-threatening. "The child is yours?" he asked quietly in English. Sarah nodded, suddenly nervous. She had learned during her time with the Apache that children were precious to their culture, but she wasn't sure what this man's intentions might be. "She is beautiful," Ayana continued, glancing toward the baby. "Like her mother." The simple compliment brought tears to Sarah's eyes. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to her with kindness or seen her as anything more than property. "You are not happy here," Ayana observed. It wasn't a question. Sarah looked toward the trading post where Marcus's laughter boomed through the open door. She wanted to tell this stranger everything, about her captivity, her desperation, her fears for Emma's future. But years of caution held her tongue. "I must go," she whispered, gathering the laundry quickly. Ayana nodded but didn't move away immediately. "Sometimes the winds of change blow when we least expect them," he said cryptically before returning to the trading post. That night, as Sarah lay on her thin mattress with Emma beside her, she couldn't stop thinking about the Apache man's words. There had been something in his tone that suggested more than casual conversation. For the first time in months, a tiny seed of hope began to grow in her heart. Outside, she could hear Marcus and his men drinking and gambling late into the night. The Apache man had been given a place to sleep in the barn, a common courtesy extended to trading partners. Sarah wondered if he was planning to leave in the morning or if his business would keep him at the post longer. As Emma stirred and reached for her mother with tiny fingers, Sarah made a silent promise. Whatever it took, whatever the cost, she would find a way to give her daughter a better life than this prison on the frontier. The Apache stranger's unexpected kindness had reminded her that not all hope was lost. Sarah woke before dawn to Emma's soft crying. The trading post was quiet except for the snoring coming from Marcus's room and the gentle sounds of horses in the corral. As she fed her daughter, Sarah noticed that the Apache man's horse was still in the barn. He hadn't left during the night as she had expected. When the sun rose higher, Ayana emerged from the barn and began preparing his morning meal by a small fire he had built away from the main buildings. Sarah watched him through the window as she prepared breakfast for Marcus and his men. There was something peaceful about the way he moved, completely different from the rough, hurried actions of the other men around the trading post. Marcus stumbled out of his room, his clothes wrinkled and his breath reeking of whiskey. "That Apache still here?" he grumbled, splashing water on his face from a basin. "Yes, sir," Sarah replied quietly, setting his breakfast on the wooden table. "Good. He's got more silver than he showed me yesterday. I can smell wealth on a man, and that one's hiding something valuable." Sarah's stomach tightened with worry. Marcus's greed had led to trouble before. 2 months ago, he had tried to cheat a group of Mexican traders and ended up in a gunfight that left one man dead. The incident had brought unwanted attention from territorial authorities, forcing Marcus to lay low for several weeks. Throughout the morning, Sarah noticed Ayana observing the daily routines of the trading post. He watched how Marcus treated his men, how the Mexican women hurried about their tasks with downcast eyes, and how Sarah herself moved carefully to avoid drawing attention. Around midday, a small group of travelers arrived, a family heading west with 2 wagons. The man introduced himself as Robert Carson, traveling with his wife Martha and their teenage son David. They needed supplies and wanted to trade for fresh horses. Marcus immediately saw opportunity. The Carson family had quality goods and healthy livestock, exactly the kind of customers he preferred. He put on his most charming manner, offering them food and shelter while they conducted business. "You folks are lucky to find us," Marcus told them, as they unhitched their horses. "Next trading post is 4 days hard ride west, and there's been Apache trouble on that trail lately." Sarah noticed Ayana's slight smile at Marcus's lie. The Apache had been peaceful in this region for months, but Marcus often used fear to manipulate customers into paying higher prices or staying longer than planned. Martha Carson was a kind woman who immediately noticed Sarah's situation. "Is this your wife?" she asked Marcus directly, gesturing toward Sarah. "She works for me," Marcus replied carefully. "Takes good care of the place." Martha's eyes were sharp and intelligent. Sarah could see the woman understood more than she was saying. When Marcus and the men went to examine the Carsons' horses, Martha approached Sarah quietly. "That's a beautiful baby," Martha said, smiling at Emma. "How old is she?" 3 months, Sarah replied, grateful for the woman's gentle tone. You seem very young to be out here alone. Do you have family? Before Sarah could answer, Marcus returned. Sarah's got all the family she needs right here, he said with false cheerfulness. We take good care of her, don't we, boys? His men laughed, but Sarah caught the warning look in Marcus's eyes. Martha Carson clearly sensed the tension but was wise enough not to push further in front of Marcus. That evening, as the Carson family prepared to camp nearby, Ayanna approached their fire. Sarah was surprised to see him engage in friendly conversation with Robert Carson. The two men spoke about trail conditions, weather, and trading opportunities. You're Apache, Robert observed, but without hostility. My grandfather traded with your people in Arizona Territory. Always found them fair and honest. Some of us still are, Ayanna replied with a slight smile. Though these days, trust is harder to come. Sarah was serving dinner to Marcus and his men when she overheard Ayanna talking with Martha Carson about her baby. Apache children are considered gifts from the spirits, he was saying. We believe they choose their families before they are born. What a beautiful way to think about it, Martha replied. That little one certainly seems to have chosen a loving mother. Marcus's head snapped up at the conversation. He had been drinking again and was growing suspicious of all the attention being paid to Sarah and Emma. Time for you to get inside, he told Sarah roughly. Baby needs to sleep. As Sarah gathered Emma and prepared to retreat to her small room, she caught Ayanna watching the exchange. His expression was carefully neutral, but she sensed his disapproval of Marcus's treatment. Later that night, unable to sleep, Sarah stepped outside for fresh air. The night was clear and cool, with stars spread across the desert sky like scattered diamonds. She was surprised to find Ayanna sitting by the dying embers of his fire, apparently deep in thought. The stars are beautiful tonight, she said softly, not wanting to wake anyone. My grandmother used to say the stars were the campfires of those who had gone before us, Ayanna replied. She said they watched over us and guided us when we lost our way. I feel very lost, Sarah admitted before she could stop herself. Ayanna looked at her with those intelligent eyes. Sometimes being lost is the first step toward finding where we truly belong. And sometimes there's no way out, Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. Sometimes you're trapped by circumstances beyond your control. There is always a way, Ayanna said firmly. It may not be easy and it may require great courage, but there is always a way. Before Sarah could respond, they heard movement from the trading post. Marcus appeared in the doorway, his figure silhouetted against the lamplight inside. Sarah, get in here now. Sarah hurried toward the building, but not before Ayanna spoke once more. Tomorrow I will offer Marcus a trade, he said quietly, something that might interest him greatly. Sarah's heart began to race, but she forced herself to walk calmly past Marcus and into the trading post. Whatever Ayanna was planning, she could only hope it wouldn't make her situation worse. What were you doing out there? Marcus demanded, grabbing her arm roughly. Just getting some air. The baby was restless. Marcus's grip tightened. You stay away from that Apache. I don't trust him. And I don't trust you around him. Yes, sir, Sarah replied, knowing better than to argue. As she lay down beside Emma, Sarah's mind raced with possibilities. Ayanna's words had planted something dangerous in her heart. Hope. But hope could be the cruelest thing of all if it led to disappointment and punishment. Still, as she listened to the wind whistling around the trading post, she couldn't shake the feeling that change was coming. Whether that change would bring freedom or deeper captivity remained to be seen. The next morning brought unexpected tension to the trading post. Sarah noticed Marcus was more agitated than usual, checking and rechecking his weapons while casting suspicious glances toward Ayanna's camp. The Carson family was preparing to leave after breakfast, but their departure was delayed when one of their wagon wheels developed a crack. You'll need to stay another day while we fix that, Marcus told Robert Carson, though his tone suggested this wasn't entirely unwelcome news. Can't have you breaking down in the middle of nowhere. While the men worked on the wheel repair, Ayanna approached Marcus with a proposition that would change everything. I have something that might interest you, Ayanna said, producing a leather pouch from his saddlebags. When he opened it, Marcus's eyes widened with greed. Inside were 3 pieces of turquoise unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. Each stone was perfectly cut and polished, with veins of silver running through the deep blue material. They were clearly valuable, the kind of stones that wealthy collectors in eastern cities would pay enormous sums to acquire. Where did you get these? Marcus asked, his voice tight with desire. My grandfather was a medicine man, Ayanna explained calmly. These stones have been in my family for many generations. They are said to bring protection and wisdom to their owner. And you want to trade them? For the right price, yes. Marcus's hands shook slightly as he examined the stones. Sarah could see him calculating their worth, imagining the profit he could make. What do you want for them? Marcus asked. The woman and her child. The words hung in the air like thunder. Marcus's face went from surprise to angry in an instant. She's not for sale, he snapped. I told you she works for me. Everything has a price, Ayanna replied evenly. These stones are worth more than most men see in a lifetime. Surely they are worth more than one woman and a baby. Sarah felt her heart hammering in her chest. She was hanging laundry nearby and could hear every word. The idea that someone would offer such valuable items for her freedom seemed impossible. Marcus was clearly torn. The turquoise stones represented wealth beyond his usual dreams, but losing Sarah meant losing his cook, cleaner, and the symbol of his power over others. Why do you want them? Marcus demanded suspiciously. What's she to you? During my time with my people, I learned that Apache children were taken by white soldiers, Ayanna explained. This woman lived among us before you acquired her. She showed kindness to our children, even though she was a captive herself. This is a debt of honor. It was a clever explanation that Sarah recognized as partly true. She had indeed tried to help Apache children during her captivity, sharing her meager food and comforting them when they were frightened. Marcus walked away to think, clutching the turquoise stones. Sarah could see him weighing his options, and she knew the decision could go either way. Meanwhile, Martha Carson had been quietly observing the situation. She approached Sarah while Marcus was distracted. That Apache man is trying to buy your freedom, Martha whispered. Are you willing to go with him? Sarah looked at baby Emma sleeping in her arms. I don't know what choice I have, but anything would be better than staying here. Robert and I have been talking, Martha continued quietly. If you can get free, you're welcome to travel with us to California. We could use help with cooking and camp duties, and we'd make sure you and the baby are safe. Hope flared in Sarah's chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. Too much could still go wrong. Marcus returned with his decision. The stones are valuable, but not valuable enough, he told Ayanna. I'll need more. Ayanna nodded as if he had expected this response. I also have this, he said, producing a rifle from his horse. It was a new Winchester repeating rifle, the kind that commanded high prices on the frontier. And 20 rounds of ammunition, Ayanna added, showing Marcus a box of cartridges. Marcus's greed was winning the battle against his possessiveness. The rifle alone was worth a small fortune, and combined with the turquoise stones, the offer was becoming irresistible. Throw in your horse, Marcus said, and we have a deal. The horse stays with me, Ayanna replied firmly, but I will add this. He produced a small bag of silver coins, Spanish pieces that were highly valued in trade. Sarah watched the negotiation with growing amazement. Ayanna was offering a fortune for her and Emma's freedom. She couldn't understand why this stranger would risk so much for people he barely knew. Marcus studied the collection of valuables spread before him. His 3 hired men had gathered around, their eyes wide at the wealth being offered. Boss, that's more money than we've seen all year, one of them whispered. Shut up, Marcus snapped. But Sarah could see he was reaching the same conclusion. Finally, Marcus nodded. We have a deal, but I want to count everything twice, and if any of it turns out to be fake, the agreement is off. Ayanna agreed to the inspection. For the next hour, Marcus and his men examined every item carefully. They tested the silver coins with their teeth, studied the turquoise stones under magnifying glasses, and inspected every part of the rifle. During the inspection, Sarah packed her few belongings and prepared Emma for travel. Her hands shook with nervousness and excitement. After months of captivity, freedom seemed within reach. Robert Carson had discreetly prepared a place for Sarah and Emma in one of his wagons. Martha had gathered extra blankets and baby supplies, understanding that Sarah owned almost nothing. As the transaction neared completion, one of Marcus's men raised a concern. Boss, what if she runs back to the Apache and tells them about our operation here? Sarah's blood ran cold. Marcus's operation involved more than just legitimate trading. She had seen him sell weapons to hostile tribes and provide information to raiders about wagon train schedules. If he thought she posed a threat to his illegal activities, he might change his mind about the deal. Marcus studied Sarah with calculating eyes. "She won't say anything," he said finally. "Will you, Sarah?" "No, sir," Sarah replied quickly. "I just want to take my baby somewhere safe." Ayanna stepped forward. In Apache culture, a person's word is sacred. If she gives her promise, it will be kept. After what felt like an eternity, Marcus nodded. "All right then. The woman and child are yours." As the final details were arranged, Sarah realized she was about to leave with a man she knew almost nothing about. But as she looked at baby Emma, she knew she would take any chance for a better life, even if it meant trusting a stranger who had just paid a fortune for their freedom. The moment of transfer came with surprising swiftness. Marcus completed his inspection of the turquoise stones and silver coins, his greed finally overwhelming his possessiveness. Sarah found herself standing in the dusty yard of the trading post, holding Emma while her few belongings sat in a small bundle at her feet. "She's yours now," Marcus said to Ayanna, though his tone suggested he was already regretting the decision. "But remember our agreement. If there's any trouble from this, I'll know where to find you." Ayanna remained calm in the face of Marcus's veiled threat. "There will be no trouble. I keep my word." Sarah felt strange being spoken about as if she were property changing hands, but she understood this was the only way her freedom could be secured in this harsh frontier world. The important thing was that Emma would grow up free from Marcus's violence and control. Robert Carson approached with his wagon ready for travel. "We should leave soon if we want to make good time today," he said diplomatically, though Sarah sensed he was as eager to get away from the trading post as she was. As they prepared to depart, Martha Carson quietly pressed a small bag into Sarah's hands. "Some things for the baby," she whispered. "And a little money for when you get to California." Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes at this unexpected kindness from a woman she barely knew. "Thank you," she managed to say. The wagon train pulled away from the trading post just after noon. Sarah rode in the Carson's second wagon with Emma, while Ayanna rode alongside on his horse. As the buildings disappeared behind them, Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she was carrying. For the first several miles, no one spoke much. The reality of what had just happened was still sinking in for everyone involved. Sarah kept expecting to hear Marcus and his men riding after them, demanding the return of his property. Finally, when they stopped to rest the horses, Ayanna approached Sarah directly. "I need you to understand something," he said seriously. "When I told Marcus I had a debt of honor concerning you, that was only partly true. I do remember your kindness to Apache children, but that is not why I bought your freedom." Sarah felt a chill of worry. "Then why?" "Because no person should be owned by another," Ayanna said simply. "What Marcus was doing to you was wrong, regardless of how he acquired you or what he paid." "But you sacrificed so much," Sarah protested. "Those stones, the rifle, the silver, that was a fortune." Ayanna smiled slightly. "My grandfather always said that wealth means nothing if it cannot be used to help others. Besides, material things can be replaced. Freedom cannot be bought back once it is truly lost." Robert Carson joined their conversation. "My wife and I have been talking about your situation," he said to Sarah. "We understand you want to make a new life for yourself and your daughter. When we reach California, we can help you find work and a place to live." "I don't know how to repay such kindness," Sarah said, overwhelmed by the generosity of these strangers. "No repayment necessary," Martha Carson added, coming up behind her husband. "We're just glad to help a fellow traveler." That evening, they made camp by a small stream. Sarah helped with cooking duties, grateful to be working by choice rather than under threat. Emma seemed to sense the change in their circumstances and was calmer than she had been in weeks. As they sat around the campfire after dinner, Ayanna shared stories of his travels. He spoke of distant lands and different peoples he had encountered, painting pictures of a world far larger and more diverse than Sarah had ever imagined. "You speak English very well," Robert Carson observed. "Did you learn it from traders?" "Partly," Ayanna replied, "but also from missionaries who came to our territory when I was young. They wanted to teach us their religion, but they also taught us their language." "And what did you think of their religion?" Martha asked with genuine curiosity. Ayanna considered the question carefully. "They spoke of love and forgiveness, which are good things. But they also seemed to believe that their way was the only right way, which troubled me. My grandmother always said that the Great Spirit speaks to all people, but in different languages. Sarah found herself drawn into the conversation in a way she hadn't experienced in months. At the trading post, she had been invisible, spoken to only when Marcus needed something. Here, these people listened to her opinions and treated her thoughts as valuable. As the fire burned lower, David Carson, the teenage son, asked Ayanna about Apache customs and traditions. The young man was clearly fascinated by the opportunity to learn about a culture so different from his own. "Are you planning to return to your people?" David asked. "Eventually," Ayanna said. "But first I have other obligations to fulfill." Sarah wondered what those obligations might be, but didn't feel it was her place to ask. This man had already done more for her than she had any right to expect. Over the next several days, the small wagon train made steady progress westward. Sarah gradually relaxed as it became clear that Marcus wasn't pursuing them. She began to allow herself to believe that freedom might actually be real. During the long hours of travel, she and Ayanna often rode near each other, and she learned more about the man who had changed her life. He was well educated, having spent time in several cities learning about white culture and politics. But he remained deeply connected to his Apache heritage and spoke of his people with love and respect. "Why did you really leave your tribe?" Sarah asked one afternoon when they were walking beside the wagon to give the horses a rest. "My people are facing difficult times," Ayanna said quietly. "The government wants to force us onto reservations, to make us live like white farmers. Some of our leaders believe fighting is the only answer, while others think cooperation is the only way to survive. And what do you believe?" "I believe both sides are partly right and partly wrong. Fighting will only bring more soldiers and more death, but complete surrender means the end of our way of life." He paused, looking out over the vast landscape. "I am trying to find a third path, one that might preserve something of who we are while adapting to the new world that is coming." Sarah was struck by the weight of responsibility this young man carried. Her own problems, as serious as they had been, were small compared to the survival of an entire people. That evening, as they camped near a small settlement, they encountered other travelers with disturbing news. There had been Apache raids further south, and territorial authorities were organizing militia companies to retaliate. "They're not being too careful about which Apache they go after," one traveler warned. "Anyone with dark skin and long hair is being treated as hostile." Ayanna received this news with visible concern. Sarah realized that by traveling with them, he was putting himself at considerable risk. If they encountered hostile settlers or military patrols, his presence could bring danger to everyone. As if reading her thoughts, Ayanna approached the Carson family that evening. "I think it would be better if I traveled separately from here on," he said. "My presence may put you in danger." "Nonsense," Robert Carson replied firmly. "You're traveling peacefully, same as us. Any fair-minded person can see that." "Unfortunately, fair-minded people are becoming rare," Ayanna said sadly. Sarah felt a pang of loss at the thought of Ayanna leaving their group. Over the past week, she had come to rely on his quiet strength and wisdom. More than that, she had begun to feel something she hadn't expected, a growing attraction to the man who had rescued her from captivity. The decision about whether Ayanna should continue traveling with them was made for them the next morning. As they broke camp, a group of territorial militia rode into their campsite, led by a hard-faced captain named Morrison. "Morning, folks," Morrison said, though his tone was anything but friendly. "We're looking for Apache raiders who hit a settlement 2 days south of here." Robert Carson stepped forward calmly. "We haven't seen any raiders, Captain. We're just travelers heading to California." Morrison's eyes fixed on Ayanna, who had remained perfectly still beside his horse. "That one's Apache. He's traveling with us peacefully," Carson replied. "Helped us with some trading business back east, is that so?" Morrison dismounted and approached Ayanna directly. "What's your name, Indian?" "Ayanna," he replied with dignity, though Sarah could see the tension in his posture. "Well, Ayanna, you're going to come with us for questioning. We want to know what you know about the raids." "I know nothing about any raids," Ayanna said firmly. "I have been traveling with these people for a week." Captain Morrison's hand moved to his gun. "That's what they all say. Boys, tie him up." Sarah felt her heart racing with panic. After everything Ayanna had done for her, she couldn't stand by and watch him be taken by these men. She knew what happened to Apache prisoners. They rarely survived long enough to prove their innocence. "Wait," she called out, stepping forward with Emma in her arms. "He's telling the truth." Morrison looked at her with suspicion. "And who might you be?" "Sarah Mitchell," she said, using her married name. "This man saved my life. He helped rescue me from Apache raiders who had taken me captive." It was a calculated lie, but one that might save Ayana's life. Sarah was betting that Morrison would be more likely to believe an Apache man had rescued a white woman than that he was involved in raids. "Is that right?" Morrison's interest was piqued. "Tell me about these raiders." Sarah took a deep breath, knowing she had to make the story convincing. "They attacked our wagon train 3 months ago, killed my husband and took me prisoner. This man negotiated my release and helped me get back to safety." Martha Carson, understanding what Sarah was trying to do, stepped forward to support the story. "It's true, Captain. Poor dear had been through such an ordeal. This Apache gentleman was instrumental in her rescue." Morrison studied both women carefully, then looked back at Ayana. "If that's true, then you must know something about the tribe that's been causing trouble." Ayana met his gaze steadily. "There are many Apache bands scattered across this territory. If you describe these raiders, I might be able to tell you which group they belong to." For the next several minutes, Morrison described the attacks. Ayana listened carefully, then provided information that seemed to satisfy the captain's suspicions about his innocence. "Sounds like the band led by Goyakla," Ayana said. "They have been moving north from Mexico, hitting isolated settlements. They are not from this region." Morrison nodded slowly. "That matches what we've heard from other sources." He looked at Sarah again. "You're sure this man helped you?" "I'm certain," Sarah said firmly. "Without his help, my baby and I would never have survived." Finally, Morrison and his men mounted their horses. "You folks be careful out there," he warned. "And keep an eye on your Apache friend. These are dangerous times for everyone." As the militia rode away, Sarah felt her knees go weak with relief. Ayana approached her quietly. "Thank you," he said simply. "That was very brave." "I couldn't let them take you," Sarah replied. "Not after everything you've done for us." Robert Carson organized the wagon train to move out quickly, wanting to put distance between them and any potential trouble. As they traveled, Sarah found herself walking beside Ayana's horse, needing to talk about what had happened. "The story I told them," she began hesitantly, "about you rescuing me from raiders." "I understand why you said it," Ayana replied. "You were protecting me, just as I tried to protect you at the trading post." "But it wasn't entirely a lie," Sarah continued. "You did rescue me, just not from Apache raiders. You rescued me from Marcus, and that was just as real." Ayana slowed his horse to match her walking pace. "And you rescued me today from those soldiers. Perhaps we are even now." "I don't think it works that way," Sarah said with a small smile. "I think when people help each other, it creates something bigger than keeping score." That evening, they camped near a small town where they could purchase fresh supplies. Martha Carson volunteered to stay with Emma while Sarah went to the general store with Ayana. It was the first time they had been alone together since leaving the trading post. As they walked through the dusty streets, Sarah became aware of the stares they were attracting. A white woman walking with an Apache man was clearly unusual in this part of the country. "People are watching us," Sarah said quietly. "Does that bother you?" Ayana asked. Sarah considered the question. "A few weeks ago it might have. But now I find I don't care what strangers think about my choices." In the general store, they purchased supplies for baby Emma and dried goods for the journey. The store owner, a middle-aged man with suspicious eyes, overcharged them for everything but accepted their money readily enough. "You folks traveling together?" the store owner asked with barely concealed disapproval. "We're part of a wagon train heading to California," Sarah replied evenly, refusing to be intimidated. Outside the store, Ayana spoke quietly. "This will only get more difficult as we travel further west. There are many people who will not understand our friendship." "Then we'll have to help them understand," Sarah said with more confidence than she felt. That night, as they sat around the campfire, Robert Carson raised a practical concern that had been weighing on everyone's minds. "We'll be reaching the Colorado River in about 10 days, he said. "After that, it's desert travel for several weeks before we reach the California settlements. It's going to be the most dangerous part of our journey." "Dangerous how?" Sarah asked, holding Emma close. "Water is scarce and the heat can kill if you're not prepared," Martha explained. "Plus, there are still hostile tribes in that region who don't appreciate travelers crossing their territory." Ayana had been quiet during this conversation, but now he spoke up. I know those desert trails. I have traveled them many times. If you wish, I can guide you through the safest routes. David Carson looked up eagerly. You'd do that for us? These people have become my friends, Ayanna said simply. Friends help each other. Sarah felt her heart warm at his words, but she also noticed the meaningful look that passed between Robert and Martha Carson. They were clearly wondering about the growing connection between Sarah and Ayanna. Over the next few days, as they approached the river crossing, Sarah found herself spending more and more time in conversation with Ayanna. He taught her about desert survival, showed her which plants could provide water in emergencies, and explained how to read the signs that indicated safe camping spots. You're very knowledgeable about so many things, Sarah observed one afternoon as they walked together. Have you ever thought about becoming a teacher or working with the government as a translator? Ayanna was quiet for a long moment. I have been asked to work with government officials before. They want Apache who can help them understand my people, make negotiations easier. And you don't want to do that? The government says they want to understand, but what they really want is to find ways to control us more effectively. His voice carried a sadness that touched Sarah's heart. They offer good money and comfortable positions to Apache who will help them, but in the end, we would just be helping to destroy our own way of life. Sarah began to understand the impossible position Ayanna was in. He was caught between two worlds, belonging fully to neither, trying to find a path that would preserve what he loved while adapting to an inevitable future. What will you do when we reach California? She asked. I'm not sure yet, he admitted. I have some contacts in San Francisco, traders who deal fairly with native peoples. Perhaps I can find work there, save money, and then return to help my people when they need me. And if your people are forced onto a reservation? Ayanna's jaw tightened. Then I will go with them. A leader does not abandon his people when times are hard. That evening, Martha Carson approached Sarah while she was feeding Emma. I hope you don't mind me asking, Martha said gently, but I've noticed you and Ayanna have become quite close. Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. He's been very kind to us. He seems like a good man, Martha continued. But I worry about the difficulties you might face if your friendship becomes something more. What do you mean? Martha sat down beside her. Sarah, dear, you're a young woman who's been through terrible hardships. It would be natural for you to develop feelings for the man who rescued you, but the world can be very cruel to couples who are different races. Sarah understood Martha's concerns, but she also felt defensive. Ayanna has shown me more respect and kindness than any white man I've known, including my late husband. I'm not questioning his character, Martha said quickly. I'm just worried about the practical realities. Where would you live? How would you support your daughter? What kind of life could you build together? These were questions Sarah had been avoiding, but she knew they were valid. The growing feelings she had for Ayanna were real, but so were the obstacles they would face. That night, as she lay under the stars with Emma sleeping beside her, Sarah tried to imagine what her future might hold. For the first time in months, she had choices to make rather than simply surviving day by day. The freedom Ayanna had bought for her was real, but with freedom came responsibility for her own decisions. She looked across the dying campfire to where Ayanna sat keeping watch. He seemed to sense her gaze and looked back at her. Even in the darkness, she could feel the connection between them growing stronger. But she also knew that Martha Carson was right about the challenges they would face. The question was whether love could overcome the barriers that society would place in their path, or whether those barriers would prove too strong for even the deepest feelings to conquer. The Colorado River crossing proved to be more challenging than anyone had anticipated. The spring runoff had made the water higher and faster than usual, and the ferry operator demanded twice the normal fee when he saw Ayanna in their group. Don't like transporting Indians, the ferryman said bluntly. Brings bad luck and bad attention from the wrong people. Robert Carson stepped forward firmly. He's part of our group and we all cross together or not at all. After much negotiation and additional payment, they finally made it across the river. But the incident left everyone unsettled about what they might face in the weeks ahead. The desert landscape that stretched before them was both beautiful and terrifying. Vast expanses of sand and rock extended to the horizon, broken only by sparse vegetation and distant mountains. The heat was intense even in the early morning, and Sarah quickly understood why Ayanna had insisted they travel mainly at dawn and dusk, resting during the hottest part of each day. Water discipline is essential out here, Ayana explained to the group on their first desert morning. Everyone gets a measured amount each day, no more. If someone drinks their ration too quickly, they cannot have more until the next day. It was harsh but necessary. They were carrying as much water as the wagons could bear, but it still might not be enough if they encountered delays. On the third day in the desert, they faced their first real crisis. David Carson developed severe stomach problems, likely from drinking contaminated water at their last stop. The young man was violently ill and growing weaker by the hour. "We need to find shelter and let him rest," Martha Carson said, her voice tight with worry. Ayana studied the landscape carefully. "There is a canyon about 2 miles north of here. It will provide shade and protection from the wind." As they made their way to the canyon, Sarah noticed storm clouds building on the horizon. In the desert, she had learned, flash floods were a constant danger during the rainy season. "Will we be safe in the canyon if it rains?" she asked Ayana. "This particular canyon has high ground and good drainage," he replied, "but we will need to be careful about where we camp." They reached the canyon just as the first raindrops began to fall. The walls provided blessed relief from the sun, and they found a safe camping spot on elevated ground away from the main wash. David's condition continued to worsen throughout the day. He couldn't keep water down, and his fever was rising dangerously. Martha was beside herself with worry, and Robert paced anxiously around their small camp. "There's a plant that might help," Ayana said quietly to Sarah. "But I would need to search for it, and that means leaving the group alone for several hours." "What kind of plant?" "Apache call it ghost medicine. It grows in hidden places in these canyons, and it can help with stomach sickness when prepared properly." Sarah looked at David, who was lying pale and motionless in the wagon. Without treatment, she wasn't sure he would survive another day in the desert heat. "How dangerous would it be for you to search alone?" "There are risks," Ayana admitted. "Mountain lions, unstable rocks, getting lost. But the boy will die without help." The decision was made quickly. Despite Robert Carson's protests about the danger, Ayana set out alone to search for the medicinal plant. He promised to return before nightfall, but as the hours passed with no sign of him, Sarah began to worry terribly. "Maybe I should have gone with him," she said to Martha as they tended to David, "and leave Emma motherless if something went wrong." Martha replied gently, "He made the right choice going alone." As darkness fell, they heard the sound of horse hooves on rock. Ayana emerged from the shadows leading his horse and carrying a bundle of plants. He looked exhausted but triumphant. "I found what we need," he announced, immediately setting to work preparing the medicine. Under the light of their campfire, Ayana ground the roots and leaves into a paste, then mixed it with carefully rationed water to create a bitter-smelling tea. "This will taste terrible," he warned Martha, "but he needs to drink as much as he can keep down." Throughout the night, they took turns giving David small sips of the medicine. Sarah found herself working closely with Ayana, and she was struck by his gentleness and skill in caring for the sick young man. "Where did you learn about medicine?" she asked quietly. "My grandmother was a healer," Ayana replied. "She taught me that knowledge of plants and healing is one of the most valuable gifts a person can possess." By morning, David's fever had broken, and he was able to keep water down. The crisis had passed, and the grateful Carson family knew they owed their son's life to Ayana's knowledge and courage. "How can we ever repay you?" Robert asked. "No repayment needed," Ayana said, echoing what the Carsons had told Sarah weeks earlier. "We help each other. That is what makes us human." As they prepared to continue their journey, Sarah realized that something fundamental had changed in how she viewed Ayana. She had been attracted to his kindness and intelligence, but now she saw him as a man of genuine courage and deep wisdom. The barriers that Martha Carson had warned her about seemed less important when compared to the character of the man who had repeatedly risked everything for others. That evening, as they camped at another watering hole, Sarah found the courage to speak privately with Ayana about her feelings. "I need to tell you something," she began nervously. "Over these past weeks, I've developed feelings for you that go beyond gratitude." Ayana looked at her steadily. "And I have feelings for you that go beyond the debt of honor I claim to Marcus." "But Martha Carson is right about the difficulties we would face," Sarah continued. "The world isn't ready for people like us to be together. Perhaps the world will never be ready," Ayana said quietly. "But that doesn't change what we feel, does it?" Sarah shook her head, tears forming in her eyes. I don't want to make your life harder than it already is. You have your people to think about, your responsibilities. And you have Emma to consider. Ayanna replied. She deserves a life where she won't face hatred because of her mother's choices. They sat in silence for a moment, both understanding the impossible situation they faced. Their feelings were real and deep, but the practical obstacles seemed insurmountable. What if we waited? Sarah asked finally. What if we got to California, established ourselves separately, and saw what the future brings? Ayanna nodded slowly. Time might show us a path that we cannot see now. It wasn't a solution, but it was a hope. And for two people who had survived captivity, violence, and the harsh desert, hope was enough to sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead. As the stars came out over the desert, Sarah held Emma close and allowed herself to dream of a future where love might indeed overcome the barriers that seemed so formidable in the darkness. The final weeks of desert travel tested everyone's endurance, but Ayanna's expert guidance brought them safely through the most dangerous stretches. When they finally crested the last ridge and saw the green valleys of California spreading below them, Sarah felt tears of relief and joy streaming down her face. We made it, Martha Carson whispered, her voice filled with wonder. We actually made it. The small town of Riverside welcomed the travel-worn group with the mixture of curiosity and commerce, typical of frontier settlements. There was a hotel, a general store, a blacksmith, and several businesses catering to the needs of westward travelers. As they made camp outside town, the reality of their impending separation began to settle over the group. They had become a family of sorts during their long journey, bound together by shared hardships and mutual dependence. We'll be continuing on to San Francisco in a few days, Robert Carson told Sarah. Our original offer still stands. You're welcome to come with us. Sarah looked at Emma, now 4 months old and thriving despite the harsh conditions of their travel. The baby had become the darling of their small group, bringing smiles even during the darkest moments of their journey. I appreciate everything you've done for us, Sarah replied carefully, but I think it's time for Emma and me to start building our own life. She had made this decision over the past few days, knowing that continuing to depend on the Carson family's generosity wasn't fair to them or healthy for her own growth. She needed to prove to herself that she could create a life for her daughter through her own efforts. Ayanna had been quietly making his own preparations. He had sold his horse to a local trader and purchased supplies for continuing his journey north to San Francisco. His plan was to find work with traders who dealt fairly with native peoples, save money, and eventually return to help his people navigate the changing world. On their last evening together, the group gathered around their campfire one final time. David Carson, fully recovered from his desert illness, played his harmonica while Martha sang songs that reminded them all of homes they had left behind. I have something for you, Ayanna said quietly to Sarah as the evening wound down. He handed her a small leather pouch. It's not much, but it should help you get started. Inside were silver coins, enough to rent a room and buy supplies for several weeks. Sarah stared at the money, overwhelmed by this final act of generosity. I can't take this, she protested. You've already done so much. You saved my life when those soldiers wanted to arrest me, Ayanna reminded her. This is not charity. It is one friend helping another. The next morning brought tearful farewells. The Carson family would always hold a special place in Sarah's heart, and she promised to write to them once she was settled. Her goodbye with Ayanna was the most difficult. They stood apart from the others, both knowing this might be the last time they saw each other. I will never forget what you did for us, Sarah said, fighting back tears. And I will never forget your courage and kindness, Ayanna replied. Perhaps our paths will cross again someday. I hope so, Sarah whispered. They embraced briefly, a gesture that felt both like an ending and a beginning. Then Ayanna mounted the horse he had borrowed from Robert Carson and rode north toward his uncertain future, while Sarah turned toward the town that would become her new home. Riverside proved to be a good choice for starting over. The town was growing rapidly as more settlers arrived, creating opportunities for someone willing to work hard. Sarah found a small room above the general store and convinced the owner to hire her as a clerk and bookkeeper. You're educated, Mrs. Henderson, the store owner's wife, observed approvingly. That's rare out here, especially among women traveling alone. Sarah's ability to read, write, and handle numbers made her valuable in a community where many residents lacked these skills. She also discovered a talent for helping customers find what they needed and handling difficult situations with diplomacy. Within a month, she was managing much of the store's daily operations, while Mrs. Henderson focused on ordering inventory and dealing with suppliers. The work was satisfying, and the steady income allowed her to save money for Emma's future. Baby Emma thrived in their new environment. The other women in town took turns helping with childcare when Sarah was working, and the baby's cheerful disposition made her a favorite among the customers. As autumn arrived, Sarah received her first letter from the Carson family. They had reached San Francisco safely and were prospering in their new ventures. Martha wrote warmly about their memories of the journey and asked for news about Sarah and Emma's progress. There was no word from Ayanna, though Sarah often wondered how he was faring in San Francisco. She hoped he had found the work he was seeking and was able to help his people as he had planned. One evening in late October, as Sarah was closing the store, a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. Her heart leaped with joy and surprise. "Ayanna!" He looked travel-worn but well, and his face lit up with a smile when he saw her. "I hoped I would find you here." They talked late into the night, catching up on the months since their separation. Ayanna had indeed found work in San Francisco, but the situation had proven more complicated than he had expected. "The traders I worked with were honest," he explained. "But the political situation for Native peoples is becoming worse. There is talk of moving all California tribes to reservations, regardless of their treaties or peaceful intentions. And your people back home? They have been forced onto a reservation in Arizona. The conditions are harsh and many are sick and hungry." His voice carried deep sadness. "I sent them what money I could, but it wasn't enough." Sarah listened with growing concern. "What will you do now?" "I'm not sure," Ayanna admitted. "I came here partly because I needed to see you again, to know that you and Emma were safe and well." Over the following days, as Ayanna remained in Riverside, Sarah realized that her feelings for him had not diminished during their separation. If anything, they had grown stronger. She also noticed that he seemed different, more settled, less torn between conflicting loyalties. "I've been thinking about what you said in the desert," she told him one evening as they walked together through the town's quiet streets. "About waiting to see what the future would bring. And what do you think the future holds?" Ayanna asked. "I think it holds whatever we're brave enough to build together," Sarah replied. The practical obstacles were still real. There would be people who disapproved of their relationship, challenges they would face as a mixed-race couple, and difficulties in deciding where and how to build a life together. But they had both proven their strength and resilience during the long journey that had brought them together. They had saved each other's lives literally and figuratively, and discovered a love that had survived separation and uncertainty. As Christmas approached, Ayanna made his decision. He would stay in Riverside, find work, and help Sarah build the life she was creating for herself and Emma. Together, they would face whatever challenges came their way. On a clear December morning, Sarah and Ayanna were married in a simple ceremony at the local church. The Carson family had sent their blessings by letter, and the people of Riverside, who had come to respect both Sarah's character and Ayanna's contributions to the community, welcomed them warmly. As they stood together with baby Emma between them, Sarah marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the darkness of captivity at Marcus's trading post to the freedom and love they had found together, it seemed almost impossible that so much could have changed in less than a year. But as Ayanna had once told her, sometimes the winds of change blow when we least expect them, and sometimes, if we're brave enough to trust in the possibility of something better, those winds can carry us to shores we never dared to imagine.